Well, hello there. And I'm just recently back from Breaking Convention, which is a conference on entheogenic plants, and it takes place every 2 years, and Greenwich University is the location for this extraordinary event. And I thought I'd just take a little bit of time to tell you a little bit about it. What is so wonderful about such an event is that you have people from a really wide diversity of backgrounds, from practicing shamans in North Mexico to academics in the university itself, and all the people that attend are speaking about or providing workshops on what is becoming one of the most fascinating subjects in the 21st century, working with entheogenic plants to transform consciousness. And I was exposed to a vast variety of material, and what I've done is I've brought my little booklet out here. So I'm just going to look through the booklet and tell you a little bit about some of these events I went to. And so my first one was by Elizabeth Hughes, and it's called Narratives of Psychedelic Experiences, The Quest for Truth, Self-Meaning and Transformation. And yeah, some of these papers do have very long titles. So this one ended up being utterly fascinating, about a woman from a Central European country who had a really powerful connection with nature to such an extent that she knew that she and the entire natural world were one, and was in a very advanced state of bliss for a lot of her childhood. And then things happened. Her father left the family home, separation in the family, and they moved from a beautiful location in wild nature to living in an apartment in the city. And then this led in due course to feeling the inclination to go to live and work in London, which she did, and she had accommodation, a job, and she got herself a lovely relationship with a very rich man, and it was all going beautifully, or so she thought. And then she got totally sucked into the consumerist lifestyle, and her husband was out every day, and she was twiddling her thumbs, wanting to know what to do with her life. Great sense of dissatisfaction. And she left it all behind and ended up living in squats in central London, met all sorts of people, and experienced a world of debauch, excess, particularly in terms of drugs and pharmaceutical drugs. And then finally she discovered the nature's medicine from the Amazon, and that completely transformed her life. And it brought her in touch with the innocence and the magic of childhood, and she was able to put into perspective her more difficult times that she experienced in her 20s in London. And it was a really great presentation and got me thinking. So in the afternoon I was torn between DMT Entities and Cannabis, so I did a little bit of both in terms of the workshops. And the DMT Entities was, in a way, to start with, a little bit disappointing, because actually what it was the big debate about, do these entities exist? Are they real? Are they a figment of people's imagination? And this is so 20th century, I couldn't believe it. But there are academics still feeling that's something worth talking about, so it's a little bit disappointing. But then there was this dude who's called Andrew Gallimore, and his title is What Is It Like to Be a Machine Elf? And he put up this lovely picture, and you can see there it is. And he answers the question, and the answer is, it's awesome. And that pretty much explains things, and that's certainly my experience with working with Salvia divinorum more than, gosh, it's 10 years ago now. Yeah, working with Salvia divinorum 10 years ago with a powerful extract. This is exactly what I picked up, the sense of bliss and utter enjoyment of these beings. And when we talk about machine elves or DMT entities or whatever, what we're talking about a level of existence, beings too numerous to even imagine, and what they do is to literally give form and structure to the consensus reality. So this is known, for example, there's a term called divas. So here to my left is a rosemary plant, and behind that there is a potato plant. Well, there is a diva, there is a machine elf, there's an entity which is specifically, its purpose is to construct and form that particular plant, different species of plant have got their own particular machine elves that create them. Everything that you perceive of, including your own body, is on a deep level constructed and maintained by these beings. So, dear old Andrew Gallimore, I'm going to just show you one or two little bits and pieces. They're really inspiring presentation. And the rest of them, to be honest, didn't really seem to do too much for me. Then I went into the Cannabis presentations, and some utterly extraordinary presentations here. Let's see if I can find one particular guy who I'd like to draw your attention to. Well, first of all, I went to one by Val Curran, which is Cannabis, Why Do We Need to Know More About Its Chemical Composition? And the answer is, because we do. It's fascinating, particularly in terms of medicinal uses. So what I grasped, what I already knew, as I was aware of two compounds, I was aware of something called THC and something called CBD. I knew these had important parts to play. But what I didn't know until I attended a particular presentation, I'll have to find the guy's name, because he deserves the respect and the honour. I will supply the name as a little text running underneath. So he's a man who has considerable connections with Israel and the Czech Republic, and it seems that there's been research on this miraculous plant for an extraordinarily long time. And one of the things that first of all blew me away is that he personally has identified with other researchers more than 1,055 active chemical compounds in this extraordinary plant. Over 1,000, so it really makes you think. When you think about what might be in the peyote plant or the San Pedro cactus, even the Ayahuasca plant, no, over 1,000, that's absolutely extraordinary. But let's cut to the chase. His research and the research of a number of other people I listened to made a really cogent argument which actually explains some of the demonization that's been going on in some of the mainstream press over recent years, particularly with the concept of psychosis and such like. So let me cut to the chase. It seems from the extensive research that's being done that if people make use of the cannabis containing the CBD, there is no problem with dependency, there is no problem with psychosis, and there is no problem with issues around memory. These simply don't exist. And the CBD has a very powerful healing property. It's a primary agent which gives us amazing relaxation, which causes serious life-threatening illnesses to be healed. That was very interesting. And just to listen to a man who's talking about his room in the university with an unbelievable selection of different varieties which he gives to people for their healing. So what I understand now is that the modern varieties which are very high THC and low or zero CBD, there is a problem with these. This is not a good idea, and the person could perhaps over time be surprised about dependency issues coming up, memory issues. Play it safe and make sure that if you're going to have anything to do with this plant, make sure that it contains CBD as well. Instantly makes it safe, it increases the relaxation factor, what some users of that plant refer to as the Mong factor. So that's actually a very valuable component to the experience, instinct to realise. Right, so let me continue to flick through this brochure. And then there was Lauren Unger, write Lessons in Psychic Therapy Through the Use of Psychedelics on the Peyote Road. That was a fascinating piece of work that she did there. And she took us into an understanding of how this miraculous cactus works, and much respect to her. Frederica Fisher. Her work on the Saturday afternoon, I would say, was one of the defining moments for the entire conference for me. Dealing with powerful, difficult, emotionally intense experiences in the context of psychedelic therapy is her title. And what a fascinating woman she is too. Very small, German, and very powerful. Her presentation is done entirely through the use of cartoons, and she spoke to accompany the cartoons. But then she talked about actually dealing with very difficult, challenging experiences, including full-blown psychotic experiences, which of course do happen from time to time. Here's the point she was making. This is the only bit of this entire film I want you to fully take in and digest. Anyone that has any intention of working with plants, or whoever has worked with plants, if you find yourself encountering a challenging, difficult experience where perhaps even your sense of self or your sanity is threatened, you go through something unpleasant, difficult, then you have the gold star. This is what she made absolutely clear. The people that get the most extraordinary transformational results are the people that go through the hell realms in order to get there. I've said this before in different ways, but I'm making it really clear now. And this is a woman with a lot of years of experience. And although she has a background, obviously, in psychology and the psychological sciences, she had to effectively train herself to work with plants. And the particular one she was choosing to work with was the mushroom, the psilocybin mushroom. And absolutely fascinating to listen to all that she had to say. And she's published a book. And there's the photograph of the book in question. So if you are seriously interested in this subject, this is the book to get hold of. I was very, very lucky because I was the last person to turn up to the Deep Books stall up on the 3rd floor of Breaking Convention. And great respect to Deep Books, some wonderful books there. Absolutely brilliant. So I managed to pick up that book, and just looking at the chapter and headings and subheadings, this is a mine of information which will keep me busy for months to come, I know it will. So it seems like those people that take the harshest road with these experiences actually get the greatest rewards. So that's something that'll comfort you if you may be having an experience that's particularly difficult. And that doesn't just apply to working with these psychoactive plants, it applies to life in general. If you're a person who's going through really harsh, challenging, difficult times, be aware there is gold which you are in the process of mining, even if you're not consciously aware of it at the time. And people I've spoken to, and for myself, I can count myself in this category as well, I know that I have nothing but the greatest respect for the difficulties I've been through. So she was an absolute star. The ovation that she received, people were roaring in that room because they were so excited about what she had to say. Right, so that's her. And then another one I'm going to pick up, which was on the Sunday, by Daniela Peluso, and this is called Ayahuasca and Feminine Mystique. And this turned out to be far more than we all bargained for, because she spoke about the well-attributed qualities of this plant as being a female spread, and that was all fine, that was all fair enough. But what particularly interested me was she started talking later on about misuse of plant medicines by people in Peru. If you are somebody who has booked to go to Peru or Colombia to explore plant medicines rather than working in Europe or in your own country, it is important that you are aware of a phenomenon. Now, as soon as I explain this to you, it's completely obvious. However, what I need to do is just to explain the implications for you. So there are countries like Peru and Colombia that have experienced considerable poverty for a very long time, very much in the third world in terms of economy. And what's happening is that plants which were completely ignored and people whose skills and abilities were totally maligned have come to the forefront of the Western consciousness. People are booking trips in droves. They call it entheotourism. Lots of people are going to these countries to take plants. And in the typical Western way, a lot of people are behaving in a very irresponsible and foolish manner, doing things like arriving in the country of origin, getting into a taxi and asking the taxi driver, where do I go for a retreat? Or going into a hostel on the first night, asking people behind the hostel, seeing just a post on a wall, and starting with something as basic and as uninformed as that. And yes, surprise, surprise, there are increasing accounts of women being sexually predated upon by people who are hosting ceremonies in these countries. And according to a friend I recently had a conversation with at Breaking Convention, who's actually only just come back from South America a few months ago, he made it crystal clear to me that the main issue that they encountered was people being robbed. Because what's happening is Westerners are arriving with large wads of cash on them, and with no sense whatsoever in terms of making their inquiries. So what has happened is a whole subculture has sprung of what I would call wannabe shamans, people who pretend to be shamans. People obtain the plant medicines, people who adulterate the plant medicines with highly toxic materials, and indeed my teacher a long time ago was poisoned and almost died from consuming something taken in less than ideal situations and circumstances. And listening to my friend, he had an experience with what people call the frog medicine, Cambo, and the experience he described is that the person who made the incisions in his body with a lighted joss stick and then just literally dropped the medicine in and then said, the compost toilet is over that way, get out, off you go. Complete lack of respect for his medicines, for the client he was working with, and in it for the money. So we need to be aware that in these countries where entheotourism has become rife, there are a lot of charlatans and tricksters out there with only one aim, which is to take. And it's either taking money or taking a sexual experience. So if you're going to one of these countries, if you have in all of a hurry booked, please do your research, work things out in advance. And then I will mention one of these internationally renowned centres, Hummingbird, that's the name, I've slipped it in there, Peru. And someone who'd been to an event with me had explained how this has happened, that went to Peru, did the medicine. That was all very well, but what really rankled is the fact that during the entire 10-day retreat, the only food they were offered was rice and peas. That was it. And the people who were hosting the retreat were eating really luxurious food right in their viewpoint. There's all sorts of things going on out there that you need to be aware of, but it was interesting to hear a speaker at the conference addressing the issue and giving it a breadth of perspective which only personal accounts are unable to do. So she's done her research, and it is absolutely definite. If you're going to go to one of those countries, you need to be very, very careful indeed. If you have any intuition that perhaps I'd better walk out of this ceremony right now, follow your intuition. That's what you've got it for. Far more important to safeguard yourself, your sexual integrity or your life by taking the hint from your body and walking out if that's what you need to do. And I also remember a fascinating Facebook post a few months ago about a guy who was attacked and left for dead on a sloping riverbank, and he told his story about how he got back civilization. So we need to be aware that rich Westerners are going to be an irresistible temptation for some people in some of these countries. Just good to be aware of that sort of thing. And then in terms of the workshops, I had a wonderful time with the workshops, so let me just tell you a little bit about those. So I did one which was done by Aynat Ran, and that was yoga dance. Absolutely brilliant combination of a very specific form of yoga, the name which I'm sorry, and I forget the name, and she married it with dance. It's one of the most challenging pieces of body work I've ever done in my life, and what with more than 20 years experience of 5 rhythms and a lot of experience of yoga, it's quite something to be able to faze me. But I was totally fazed by this because I was right outside my comfort zones, really challenged, so I thoroughly enjoyed that. Also a Qigong workshop, and the Qigong workshop was done by Emma Ross, who's a Qigong practitioner down in Hastings. And that workshop, bearing in mind it was for a bunch of newbies, we had less than an hour to do the work. She took us so far and so deep, it was very challenging. We were asked to hold positions which were really hard going, and I did see about 20% of the people at the workshop give up and walk out, and I can understand why. Challenging stuff, and yet I can now adopt postures which my body has internalized, and I get instant connection to the center of the earth's core, and a connection with my hands and the element of fire, which is splendid. So totally recommend Emma Ross and her work with Qigong. And then I did 2 workshops on the title of Psychedelic Sex. One was called Orgasmic Meditation, or On Meditation. Quite extraordinary this. A woman who had clearly been totally outside of the touch of her body, completely disconnected from her body, and was medicating herself by becoming somebody who could become so drunk she could consume more alcohol than any of her friends, and no connection with the body whatsoever. Came across this method, having had no real relationships experience to speak of. And I'll give you the number of it. Literally the number of their practice is 15 minutes. People get together in pairs, and there is a stroker and the stroked. The stroker gently strokes the upper left quadrant of the woman's clitoris for 15 minutes. And that is the practice. That's it. Beginning, middle and end of. And she went on to describe what happens in this practice, and it's just another method to transcend ordinary states of consciousness. That's completely obvious. So that was called Om meditation. Let's see if there's a name for that one. They're not give. Oh yes, the name is Dr. Bernadette Martinez Hernandez. That was her presentation for half an hour. Then went a guy called Michael Ellsberg, and he presented something called Sexy Psychodrama of the Absurd, Psychedelics and Sexual Healing in Lovership, from California. And the more cynical amongst you will say, well, okay, that just makes sense of everything you're going to say next, because indeed this guy was choosing to work with psychedelics with his partner who had a background of child sexual abuse, and they were working with BDSM, and I'm sure you know what that means if you don't look it up on the internet. And the more the guy spoke, the more that people in the room were shaking their heads and just, oh my goodness me, well, there's always one, isn't there? It was a beautiful example of how it's possible to step outside of all safeties, all comfort zones and all protocols, and be flying free but taking terrible risks with himself, and more particularly his partner. And there was something that sounded a big alarm bell in me when he said it, which was he made it quite clear that his partner, who was younger than him, always refers to him in their relationship as daddy. Now I think if one wants to get into a scenario in a sexual relationship, which is a safe, stable one, and one wants to make the use of names in your scenario, that is one thing. But to actually have this as a default name for the person, that's just ringing the alarm bells of what was going on there, was a continuation of the childhood abuse, and eventually the victim concerned would do what the worm does, turn and make a stand and go and get on with their lives. I'm sure that would happen. So that was a big interesting workshop for us, and that's what I like about breaking conventions. You will experience things which are way outside your comfort zones, experience things which don't apparently have anything to do with the subject at hand. Really broad remit. So I particularly want to thank these people: Cameron Adams, Dave King, David Luke, Ben Sessa and Amy Tollan. These are the people that actually make this event happen every 2 years. It's called Breaking Convention. All I've been able to do is to just make a tiny little scratch on the surface of what was a mind-blowing 3 days of information, insights, and all the rest of it. So thank you very much for everyone at Breaking Convention, and may you put on another wonderful event in 2 years' time. It will be July 2017 if it happens. Thank you.
Love yourself, find yourself, free yourself.